All right, y'all. Welcome to lesson zero of music. Let me get this on. So, before we even talk about guitar, because this is going to be centered around guitar, don't get me wrong. Um, we gotta talk about music theory so that we can talk more efficiently about music. It's better that you have a small background than to just dive into it. So, if you know anything about music, you probably know what a piano is. And if you know what a piano is, chances are you kind of know how it's situated. Hopefully, like, most people have gone to a music theory class even when they were kids. But if you haven't, we're gonna talk about that real quick. If you look at a piano, you will see two different things. You will see white keys and you will see black keys. The black keys are your sharps and flats, right? So when people say like a C sharp or a E flat, um, that is what they're talking about. The little symbol means that that is one of the black keys. No white keys are flats or sharps unless you transpose your entire piano, or change the tuning in on your entire piano is what I mean. Um, so if you start at the beginning of the black keys, the one right before the group of two, this buck teeth right here, these buck teeth, um, you get C. And if you count from C, this this key right here, this button, if you will, to the one before the repeat of it, which means you go all the way to pretty much the next pattern where this is. Then you can go one key before. You'll get B. If you count all this, you'll get 12. So that means there are 12 digits in the musical alphabet. So the reason why music might be confusing is like, so if you see these letters, you may not think that these are kind of like a number system because you assume like they're like the alphabet is like there's A and then you go to Z and then that's it. You don't go to A again. But in music, that's exactly what it does. It behaves like a number. So like just as if you would count on your fingers 1 to 10, you got to start back at one if you want to go again. That's pretty much how it is. Except there's 12. Imagine you have 12 fingers. That's alphabet. So now we're gonna talk about organizing it so that it's musical. Um, if you were to count from 1 to 12, if you were to play on your piano right here, you get to what you call it 1 to 12. Oh my gosh, I'm having a brain fart. You get the chromatic scale. What's wrong with me? To get the chromatic scale, well, like these little jumps right here, these are called semitones. We just have to count 1, 2, 3, 4. That's a semitone. That's what we call that. That little jump. In guitar talk, we call this a half step, right? Or in music theory, they call it half step, but a lot of guitarists refer to it this way. Then you have two semitones, which is a whole step. If a semitone is a half step, then a whole step would be two of them, and that means you would go from 1 to 3, for example. So like if you wanted to have a whole step, you would go from C to D. You would skip C sharp. And if you follow this pattern, it's interesting. If you start from C, you'll get a C major scale. What's the bottom of the board? This is the bottom of the board. You'll get a C major scale. If you start from C on all the white keys, right? That's just a cool thing about how the piano is at least organized. You can see the major scales, you can see the intervals from C. And of course, there's a bunch of different scales if you consider modes, but we're not going to talk about that right now. Let's talk about how the guitar is situated. So if you are right here, all happy, ready to play guitar, ready scholar of the art, you see that the top string is the thickest string. That thick string, if you were to play it without, touching the string, you get E. That's E. That's what this string is, without touching anything. The second string, because we're only going to focus on the top two strings today, is A. The second string is A. And it goes from A and all the way up. Every single fret is one semitone. One fret. That's terrible. Oh my God, John. One fret is one semitone. Right? So get comfortable with naming these frets after these letters, So like if this is an E, if you were to count, you would see that the top string here is a G. You'd see that on the 5th fret that the top string is an A. And then you'd see in the 7th fret that the top string is a B. The 3, 5, and 7 is important. 3, 5, 7, 9 is important because that is what's marked on your guitar. So it's a cool marker to just remember. It's a visual marker. So if you remember at the 3rd fret where this dot is, that you have G and C, so like the thick string here, next thick string here, this is G and C, you have a point of navigation that you can maintain. This is going to be important when we talk about shapes, if you actually want to take advantage of those shapes. If you just want to get into chords, just go on to lesson 1. That's what I would probably say. But this is just trying to get you to understand how the guitar is organized and situated musically. You can kind of see it as if every single string is pretty much a piano. Now it's impossible to play multiple fingers on one string unless you're focusing on one string. I mean, not even there because, if the pickup's right here, or if the bridge is right here, should I say, it just wouldn't even register. All the things you're playing wouldn't register. You got to play one at a time. But you're playing pretty much 6 different pianos because a piano is like this, right? Higher, lower. You can't get much more complicated than that. With the guitar, though, you get the same note at multiple areas, meaning that the guitar is more like a grid than a flat plane. So if it's like a grid, that's when we can talk about things like shapes, because that's just the cool thing about having graphs. Like in math, and you're talking about equations, you could only talk about it pretty much one-dimensionally. But when you get a graph, you can talk about things two-dimensionally. You can talk about geometry and stuff. A whole different kinds of mathematics is introduced to you as soon as you start to consider things like, the two-dimensional space. And then, of course, you move on to three-dimensional space when it comes to cubes and all that stuff. And then you talk about physics and all that other stuff and how these things can be moved and how these things influence the universe. And it's like X, Y, Z. Music is very similar to that. All these notes have relationships with each other that we're going to learn over time. But you got to understand how to count. I wouldn't ask you to learn algebra if you didn't know how to count to 12. I wouldn't ask, it's like you gotta be able to see music as what it is. So that is lesson 0.